Three ladies, one missing alibi. A Miss Marple mystery.
Three ladies, one missing alibi. A Miss Marple mystery. Dear friends, we are so glad to welcome you once again. I'm Patrick, and I am absolutely delighted to have your company this evening. A heartfelt greeting tonight to our listeners in Canada, the USA, and Cyprus. Please let us know in the comments where you are listening from, and tell us, what is the most beautiful village or countryside you've ever visited? If you are enjoying our cozy mysteries, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Settle in, get comfortable. And now, let the story unfold. Disclaimer: this video is an original fan fiction inspired by the classic mystery style of Miss Marple. It is not an official Miss Marple story. All dialogue, plot, narration, and creative content are original and created by this channel. Chapter 1. The Cry from the Morning Room. The first thing Elsie Carter said after they broke down the door was, "But she was alive 10 minutes ago." Nobody paid much attention to the words at first. There was too much else to see. Mrs. Honoria Vale lay on the carpet of the morning room at Ashcombe House, one hand stretched toward the door and the other curled beneath her body. A porcelain vase had fallen from a side table and broken beside the hearth. Papers lay scattered near the writing desk. The French windows were bolted from within. The chimney was too narrow for anything larger than a determined cat, and beneath Honoria's stiffened right hand lay the brass key to the room. Outside, evening light rested over the clipped yew hedge and the long lawn descending toward Bellwether Church. Inside, Dr. Leonard Fenwick knelt beside the body and quietly touched 2 fingers to the dead woman's throat. "She has been dead longer than 10 minutes. Elsie stared at him. "That isn't possible, sir." Inspector Thomas Hargreaves, who had arrived from Much Benham less than 20 minutes later, looked up sharply. "Why isn't it possible?" "Because I heard her." The room became very still. Miss Jane Marple, sitting near the fireplace in a straight-backed chair that nobody had thought to move for her, stopped winding the pale blue wool around her fingers. She had come to Bellwether that afternoon to stay with an old friend, Mrs. Dorothy Lang, who lived opposite the vicarage. Her presence at Ashcombe House was due to nothing more mysterious than Dorothy's tendency to arrive wherever anything happened and to bring Miss Marple with her. Elsie, pale and round-eyed in her black dress and white apron, twisted her hands. At 18 minutes to 6, I know because I had just looked at the pantry clock. I was crossing the passage outside when I heard Mrs. Vale shout. "What did she shout?" Hargreaves asked. Elsie swallowed. "You liar, get out." Just like that. Very angry. Then there was a crash. She pointed at the shattered vase. I thought perhaps she had dropped something. Mrs. Vale did not like being disturbed when she was doing business, so I went away. Then Mr. Pritchard arrived at 6. Arthur Pritchard, Honoria's solicitor, stood near the bookcase with his hat crushed between his hands. She had asked me to come at 6 precisely. When there was no answer, we tried the door. It was locked. Elsie fetched Mr. Vale from the billiard room, and between us, we forced it. Mr. Vale was Adrian Vale, Honoria's nephew, a well-built man of 38 with a handsome face that seemed made for confidence but was, at present, ashen. My aunt always locked the door when she was reading private papers. Was she expecting anyone else? No. And you were where? In the billiard room from 5:20 until Elsie called me. Simpson, the gardener, saw me through the window more than once. Inspector Hargreaves nodded and turned toward the body. Dr. Fenwick rose slowly. "I shall need a proper examination, but I should say she died between 5:20 and 5:35. Elsie made a small sound. "That can't be right." Miss Marple glanced at her. "People do sometimes hear what they are quite certain they heard," she said mildly, "and yet it may not mean quite what they think it means." Hargreaves knew of Miss Marple by reputation. He gave her a respectful, if cautious, look. "Do you see something, Miss Marple?" "Nothing at all yet, Inspector, only that the cup of tea has not been touched." On the small table beside Honoria's chair stood a silver teapot and a china cup filled nearly to the rim. A thin skin had formed over the milk. Elsie nodded eagerly. "I brought it at 5:15. She told me to leave the tray outside because the door was locked. When I came back 5 minutes later, the tray was gone. So Mrs. Vale was alive at 5:20, said Hargreaves. Yes, sir. Did you hear the door open? No. Anyone in the passage? No. Dr. Fenwick studied the cup. If poison is involved, it wasn't necessarily in the tea. At that moment, Hargreaves noticed a small silver box on the writing table. He opened it. Inside were 5 dark red throat lozenges. Did she use these? Constantly, Elsie said. Her throat had been troublesome all week. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. Were they always that colour? Elsie frowned. I couldn't say. Adrian Vale suddenly turned from the window. Inspector, surely this is absurd. She could have died naturally. Dr. Fenwick looked at him. She might have, but natural deaths do not usually give a person time to crawl toward a locked door with the key in her hand. Everyone looked at the dead woman again. That was when the impossible shape of the thing became clear. Honoria had apparently been alone. She had locked herself in. No one had entered through the windows. No one could have left through the door. Yet something had happened inside that room badly enough to make her seize the key and try to escape. And according to the servant, she had shouted at someone after the doctor believed she was already dead. Inspector Hargreaves began with the household. Adrian had returned from London at 4. Elsie had been in the kitchen and pantry. Simpson the gardener had spent the late afternoon cutting the long hedge opposite the morning room windows. You could see the windows all the time. Hargreaves asked him. Most of it, sir. Nobody went across the lawn. I'd swear to that. What about the house side? Can't say. At 4:30, however, Honoria had received one visitor, Mrs. Beatrice Harcourt. At the mention of the name, Adrian looked uncomfortable. What did she want? She and my aunt were organising the church restoration fund. Where is Mrs. Harcourt now? At the parish room, I imagine. The committee met at 5. There were others? Mrs. Lydia Fenwick and Miss Clara Bell. Dr. Fenwick's eyes flickered at his wife's name. All 3 together. So I understand. Miss Marple's hands paused again. 3 ladies, 1 locked room, and a dead woman who had apparently spoken after death. Beatrice Harcourt arrived at Ashcombe House shortly after 7, accompanied by Lydia Fenwick and Clara Bell. They entered almost as a group, though they could hardly have looked more different. Beatrice was tall, silver-haired, and handsome in the manner of women who have spent years chairing committees without ever doubting that the chair belonged to them. Lydia, the doctor's wife, was softer, nervous about the mouth, her gloves repeatedly twisting between her fingers. Clara Bell, unmarried and recently retired from the village school, was small, composed, and so quiet that one noticed her mainly when she stopped speaking. Beatrice heard the news without crying. My poor Honoria. Clara went white. Lydia sat abruptly. Hargreaves asked the question almost at once. Between 5:15 and 6 o'clock, where were you? Beatrice answered. At the parish committee meeting. With Mrs. Fenwick and Miss Bell? Yes, Lydia nodded. Clara said, yes. The entire time. For one fraction of a second, nobody spoke. Then Beatrice said firmly, we were together throughout. Miss Marple looked up, not at Beatrice, at Lydia, because Lydia had turned toward Clara before answering. Only for an instant, only long enough for the glance to be missed by anyone who was listening to words rather than watching people. But Clara had seen it, and Clara had looked away. Later, as Inspector Hargreaves began taking formal statements, the vicar hurried into the hall carrying a large brown book. I'm terribly sorry, he said. I may have made things rather more difficult. Hargreaves opened the book. It was the parish key ledger. Against the date, beside the line marked Old Schoolroom Cupboard, somebody had signed a name. Lydia Fenwick. Beside it, in the vicar's own handwriting, was the time. 5:18 p.m. The parish room was nearly 300 yards away. Hargreaves looked slowly at the 3 women. One of you has just given me a false alibi. None of them replied. Then Beatrice Harcourt did something stranger still. She reached across the table, closed the ledger, and said quietly, No, Inspector, all 3 of us have. Chapter 2. 3 ladies at 5:30. By breakfast the next morning, Bellwether had achieved the remarkable feat of knowing everything except what had actually happened. Mrs. Dorothy Lang brought 3 versions of the murder to Miss Marple's bedroom before 9 o'clock. In one, Honoria Vale had been poisoned by her nephew for the inheritance. In another, Dr. Fenwick had killed her because she had discovered an old professional scandal. The third involved a secret marriage, foreign jewels, and a woman from Monte Carlo whom nobody in Bellwether had ever seen. Miss Marple listened while buttering toast. "It is very interesting," she said, "how quickly people improve facts." Dorothy frowned. "You don't believe Adrian did it?" "I have no belief at present." "But he inherits. That is certainly a fact. Whether it is the important fact remains to be seen." Inspector Hargreaves arrived at 10. The post-mortem had provided the first firm answer. Honoria Vale had been poisoned. The poison was aconitine. "Monkshood," Dorothy whispered. "In effect," said Hargreaves. "Though Dr. Fenwick thinks it was probably administered as a prepared tincture rather than extracted from a plant, death would have followed fairly rapidly, perhaps 15 to 30 minutes after ingestion." "And the tea?" asked Miss Marple. "Clean. The lozenges. One contained traces sufficient to be suspicious. The others did not." Dorothy shuddered. "Then somebody put a poison sweet in that silver box. Looks like it. And she chose the wrong one? The right one, from the murderer's point of view." Miss Marple set down her cup, "which raises an interesting difficulty." Hargreaves smiled faintly. "I thought it might. If 5 lozenges were in the box, the murderer could hardly know which Mrs. Vale would take first unless one was distinguishable. We found that too." He produced a small evidence envelope. Inside lay a photograph of the remaining lozenges. 4 were glossy burgundy. 1 was slightly duller. The poisoned one, according to residue around the paper lining, was darker than the others before Mrs. Vale took it. It seems whoever treated it altered its surface. So Mrs. Vale may have been induced to choose it. "Possibly, or she always selected them in a particular order," Miss Marple said. Hargreaves looked at her. "You are thinking of habit. Habit is often stronger than intelligence." At 11, the 3 ladies were interviewed separately. Beatrice Harcourt went first. Her account was neat. She arrived at Ashcombe House at 4:10 to discuss the Church Restoration Fund. Honoria was irritable but alive. Beatrice left at 4:45 and walked directly to the parish room. Clara Bell arrived 5 minutes later. Lydia Fenwick arrived at 5. The meeting began. At 6, they were still together. When confronted with Lydia's signature at 5:18, Beatrice's expression hardened. "I said we were together because I considered the matter private." "What matter?" "That is Lydia's concern. You are obstructing a murder investigation." "I am aware." "Did Lydia leave the parish room?" Beatrice hesitated. "I will not answer that." Hargreaves leaned forward. "Mrs. Harcourt, Mrs. Vale was murdered." "Yes, and whoever killed her may have arranged the poison before 5 o'clock. Your committee meeting does not protect you as much as you seem to think." For the first time, Beatrice's composure slipped, only slightly. Miss Marple noticed. Clara Bell's interview was different. She seemed less frightened of the police than of memory. "Mrs. Vale and I were not friends," she said. "You had known each other many years. All my life." "Those are not the same thing," said Miss Marple. Clara looked at her with sudden gratitude. "No. What happened 25 years ago?" Hargreaves asked. Clara's fingers tightened in her lap. "Why do you ask that?" "Because Mrs. Vale had a bundle of documents on her desk dated 25 years ago." Clara closed her eyes. "I see." "What documents?" "I do not know." "Do you know a man named Julian Vale?" The silence changed. Even Hargreaves felt it. Clara opened her eyes again. "I was engaged to him, Honoria's younger brother." The name had almost vanished from Bellwether, though older villagers remembered. Julian Vale had been accused of stealing money from the Bellwether Agricultural Trust. Before charges could be formally brought, he disappeared. A jacket had later been found near the coast. No body was recovered. The village decided he had drowned himself. "Did you believe he was guilty?" asked Hargreaves. "At the time. And now?" Clara's mouth trembled. "I do not know what I believe." "Did you leave the parish room yesterday?" Again, silence. "I will not answer." Lydia Fenwick was the most visibly distressed. She did not deny signing the ledger. I needed the schoolroom cupboard. At 5:18? Yes. What for? I cannot tell you. Were Mrs. Harcourt and Miss Bell still in the parish room? Yes. When did you return? I don't remember exactly. 5:25? 5:30? Perhaps. Why did they cover for you? Lydia looked toward her husband, who stood near the door. I did not ask them to. Dr. Fenwick said coldly. Lydia, if there is something, there is nothing. Miss Marple watched him leave the room. The door closed too carefully behind him. At noon, the inspector examined the parish room. It was a square chamber beside the church, with green-painted walls, a gas fire, and a long oak table. One window faced the lane. Mrs. Mabel Croft, the church caretaker, was polishing brass in the vestry. Yes, sir. I brought the ladies' tea. Which ladies? Mrs. Croft blinked. The committee ladies. Mrs. Harcourt, Mrs. Fenwick, Miss Bell, I suppose. You suppose. Well, I don't go staring at them, sir. I had work. Were there 3 women at the table? Most of the time. Miss Marple looked interested. Most? Mrs. Croft frowned. I was in and out. Did you sit down? Once. My back was troubling me. Only for a minute. Where? At the table. In whose chair? Mrs. Croft flushed. I shouldn't know. On the table stood 4 cups. Hargreaves counted them. 4 people had tea. Mine was 1. When? I really couldn't say. Miss Marple walked toward the window. From the lane, anyone passing could see the table, but not clearly distinguish faces once twilight began. A woman in a dark coat, seated with her back toward the glass, could have been almost any woman of similar build. At the far end of the room hung a large wall clock. It showed 12:17. It stopped, Mrs. Croft said. Hasn't worked properly since Monday. What did the ladies use for the time yesterday? The church clock. Hargreaves looked through the window toward the tower. That chimes every quarter. Usually, Mrs. Croft sighed. The bell mechanism was being tested yesterday. Mr. Wilkes had been repairing it. Miss Marple smiled faintly. How very unhelpful. Back at Ashcombe House, Elsie confirmed that Honoria had received a parcel the previous morning. A recording tape, she said. Hargreaves looked up. What sort of tape? For that machine. She pointed toward a portable reel-to-reel recorder on a shelf in the library. Miss Bell had been recording old village stories for the school anniversary. Mrs. Vale talked about Ashcombe House. Where is the tape now? I don't know. The machine itself was in its case. The latest reel was missing. Clara Bell admitted she had recorded Honoria 4 days earlier. Where is the reel? I left it with her. Why? She wanted to hear herself. Did Mrs. Vale say anything angry on it? Clara frowned. Angry? Did she say, "You liar, get out"? Clara stared. No. Miss Marple was looking toward the curtains. One curtain was drawn back unevenly. Near the skirting board behind it, almost hidden by the fabric, was a pale rectangular mark where something dusty had recently stood. Hargreaves crouched. An electrical socket was beside it. The plug for the reading lamp lay on the carpet, unplugged. He looked at Miss Marple. You think the missing recorder was here? I think something was. Then whoever arranged it may have made Elsie hear a dead woman speak. A voice came from the doorway. That would be impossible. It was Beatrice Harcourt. She had entered without anyone noticing. Her eyes were fixed on the empty patch behind the curtain, and for the first time since Honoria's death, Beatrice looked genuinely afraid. Then she said, "Because the recorder was not in this room when I left yesterday." Hargreaves straightened. "I never told you when it was supposed to have been placed here." Beatrice said nothing. Chapter 3. The Woman Who Wasn't There. Beatrice Harcourt recovered quickly, but not quickly enough. "I saw the recorder in the library," she said. "Yesterday?" Hargreaves asked. "Yes. At what time?" "When I visited Honoria." "Then you knew it existed?" "Of course. But you said it was not in this room when you left." Beatrice's face became very still. "I assumed that was what you meant." Miss Marple thought it was an excellent answer. It had all the qualities of a good lie: speed, simplicity, and just enough irritation to discourage further questions. Unfortunately for Beatrice, Inspector Hargreaves was not easily discouraged. He searched Ashcombe House from attic to cellar. The missing reel was not found. Neither was any device that could have played Honoria's voice from behind the curtain. There was, however, a second discovery. The silver lozenge box had not belonged to Honoria for long. It was a present, Elsie remembered. Came Tuesday. From whom? I don't know. Adrian did. Aunt Beatrice gave it to her. Hargreaves raised an eyebrow. Your aunt? Not literally. I've called Mrs. Harcourt that since I was a boy. Why did she give Honoria a lozenge box? Because Honoria complained constantly about losing the paper packets in her handbags. Beatrice did not deny it. I bought the box in Much Benham. Were there lozenges inside? No. You are certain? Quite. And you knew Mrs. Vale suffered from throat trouble. The whole village knew. It was a useful fact. It was also almost too useful. By afternoon, Bellwether had decided Beatrice Harcourt was the murderer. Miss Marple became less certain. People who appear guilty too early in an investigation, she had found, were often guilty only of appearing guilty. She went to see Clara Bell. Clara lived in a narrow brick cottage behind the old school. Her sitting room contained more books than furniture, and a vase of Michaelmas daisies cut too short for their stems. I wondered when you would come, Clara said. Did you? Yes. Why? Because you watch people when they think nobody is watching. Miss Marple smiled. Schoolmistresses do much the same. Clara poured tea. For some minutes, neither mentioned murder. Then Miss Marple asked, Did Julian write to you after he disappeared? Clara's hand stopped above the sugar bowl. Yes. More than once. One letter. What did it say? That he was sorry. For stealing the money? Clara looked toward the window. No. Miss Marple waited. That was what troubled me later, Clara continued. He did not say he had stolen anything. He said only, I am sorry I could not tell you the truth without destroying someone else. Did Honoria see the letter? I showed it to her. And what did she say? That Julian was a coward even in confession. You believed her? I wanted to. Why? Clara gave a sad little laugh. Because believing that he was guilty was easier than believing he had chosen someone else's safety over me. Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. Someone else? Clara immediately withdrew. I have said too much. You left the parish room yesterday. Clara did not answer. Lydia left too. Still nothing, and neither of you will say where you went, because the truth connects with Julian. Clara stood abruptly. I cannot help you. That is not quite true, dear. Clara flinched at the gentleness. I made a promise. To Lydia? To all of us. Beatrice too? A long pause. Yes. 25 years earlier, 3 young women had made a promise about Julian Vale. Now one of those women was dead. Or rather, Honoria, who had bound them to the promise, was dead. And 3 survivors were still obeying it. That evening, Hargreaves found something Clara had failed to mention. Behind a loose panel, in the old schoolroom cupboard, the very cupboard Lydia had signed for at 5:18, was an envelope. It was empty. The dust around it had been disturbed recently. On the front, written in faded ink, were the words, For Clara, if Honoria ever tells the truth. Hargreaves brought Lydia back to the station. You went to the cupboard for this. She stared at the envelope. No. Your signature puts you there. I went to the cupboard, yes, but not for that. Then for what? I cannot say. Do you know who removed the contents? No. Was it Clara? Lydia's eyes filled with tears. I don't know. Hargreaves leaned back. Mrs. Fenwick, I am beginning to think you 3 ladies are doing everything possible to make yourselves look like murderers. Lydia laughed once, without amusement. That may be because looking like murderers is less frightening than telling the truth. About what? She lowered her voice. About what we did to Julian. For the first time, she spoke of the old scandal. The Bellwether Agricultural Trust had lost nearly £9,000. Julian Vale, then 27, had helped administer the trust with his brother-in-law, Charles Vale, Honoria's husband. Evidence pointed toward Julian. A witness had seen him handling the ledgers after hours. Another swore he had spoken desperately of debts. And 3 young women, Beatrice, Clara, and Lydia, had each told police that Julian had admitted he was in serious trouble. Did he? Hargreaves asked. No. Lydia covered her face. Honoria told us he had confessed to her. She said he wanted us to protect the family by confirming that he had been desperate. She said he had already gone abroad. We thought no trial would happen. But his name was ruined. Yes. Why continue lying after 25 years? Because the lies did not end there. What does that mean? Lydia shook her head. I cannot. Miss Marple, who had been silent, asked a different question. Who was the fourth person? Lydia looked up sharply. What fourth person? At the parish room yesterday. There were only 3 of us. And Mrs. Croft? She was working. That does not make her invisible. Lydia stared. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly. When you left at 5:18, Mrs. Croft was sitting at the table, was she not? Lydia said nothing. A person passing the window would still have seen 3 women. Hargreaves understood. And when you returned, Lydia whispered. Clara left. When? Soon after. So there were still 3 women at the table. You, Beatrice, Mrs. Croft. Yes. Where did Clara go? I don't know. Then your famous shared alibi never existed. Lydia's shoulders sagged. No. Why did you all claim it did? Because if one of us told where she went, another secret would come out. Hargreaves stood. I've had enough secrets. But Miss Marple was watching Lydia's face. There is someone you met in the old schoolroom. Lydia shut her eyes. Yes. Someone living. Yes. Someone connected with Julian? A tear escaped. Yes. Before she could say more, the station telephone rang. Hargreaves answered. He listened. His expression changed. The call was from Dr. Fenwick. A man had just been found unconscious behind Bellwether Church. He had been struck heavily on the head. In his coat pocket was a photograph of Lydia Fenwick, taken 25 years earlier. On the back, in Julian Vale's handwriting, were 4 words, Tell her I survived. Chapter 4, 25 years earlier. The injured man regained consciousness just before midnight and asked for Lydia. His name was Peter Shaw. He was 42, thin, weather-beaten, and carried the exhausted look of a man who had spent too many years leaving places before anyone could ask why he had come. Lydia entered Dr. Fenwick's consulting room as though approaching a grave. Peter opened his eyes. Mum. Dr. Fenwick turned slowly toward his wife. The word changed the room more effectively than a pistol shot. Lydia sat down. For several seconds she could not speak. Peter was her son, born when she was 19, raised by her older sister in Bristol, known publicly as Lydia's nephew. Only 3 people in Bellwether had known the truth. Clara, Beatrice, Honoria Vile. And Julian? Miss Marple asked later. Lydia nodded. Julian knew. Was he Peter's father? No. The answer came so quickly that Miss Marple believed it. Who was? A man who died before Peter was born. That has nothing to do with this. It had quite a lot to do with the old theft. As a young clerk in the Agricultural Trust Office, Lydia had taken £300 from an account to pay a private nursing home that would accept her during pregnancy without informing her family. I meant to replace it, she said. Julian found the discrepancy. He replaced the money himself. Why? Because he was kind. Clara, sitting opposite, looked away. A few months later, thousands disappeared from the same trust. That theft had not been Lydia's. Yet when suspicion fell upon Julian, Lydia could not defend him without revealing her own earlier crime. Honoria knew this. So she used you, Miss Marple said. Yes. And Beatrice. Lydia looked toward her. Beatrice's face was unreadable. We were all frightened girls, she said. Clara's voice was suddenly sharp. No, Beatrice. We were not girls. We were women old enough to know when we were destroying a man. Nobody replied. Peter told the rest. Julian had not died. He fled first to France, then Canada. He had written to Clara but received no answer after his first letter. Years passed. He married. He had no children. 2 months earlier, dying of cancer in Montreal, Julian asked Peter, whom he had somehow traced through Lydia's sister, to come to him. He wanted the truth brought home, Peter said. What truth? Hargreaves asked. Peter reached toward his coat, then stopped. The papers are gone. What papers? Copies of trust accounts. Letters. A statement. Whose statement? Julian's. Who knew you had them? Mrs. Vale. Honoria? Peter nodded. I wrote to her before I came. Julian said she was the only one who could prove the rest. Did you meet her? Yesterday afternoon. Every face in the room changed. What time? Hargreaves demanded. Around 3. What did she say? That she had lived with cowardice long enough. She told me to come back at 6:15, after her solicitor arrived. She was going to sign something. Something clearing Julian? Yes. Where were you at 5:18? In the old schoolroom. With Lydia? Yes. So Lydia's missing alibi had nothing to do with Honoria's death. She had been secretly meeting the son whose existence could destroy her marriage. Dr. Fenwick said nothing while she explained. That silence hurt her more than accusation. Who attacked you? Hargreaves asked Peter. I don't know. Did you see anyone? A figure behind me near the U-path. Then nothing. What was taken? The papers Julian gave me. The mystery had shifted. Someone had murdered Honoria. Someone had attacked Peter. Someone desperately wanted Julian Vale's evidence buried. For the first time, an old financial scandal looked less like background and more like motive. The next morning, Hargreaves searched the Vale papers. Arthur Pritchard, the solicitor, confirmed Honoria had telephoned him the day before. She sounded unusually solemn. What did she say? That she intended to correct a wrong before she died. Was she ill? Not seriously. She was 71. But she had become preoccupied with conscience. Did she mention Julian? Yes. Pritchard removed his spectacles. She said, Arthur, we condemned an innocent man because it was convenient. Who was we? She didn't say, what were you coming to sign? A sworn statement. Do you have a draft? No, she prepared it herself. That draft was missing from the desk. So was the tape reel. Yet Inspector Hargreaves found something else in Honoria's wastebasket. A torn scrap of paper. Only 3 words remained. Beatrice must know. Beatrice read the scrap without blinking. Honoria wrote my name often. We ran several committees. Did you know about the sworn statement? No. Did you know Julian was alive? No. Did you attack Peter Shaw? Certainly not. Where were you after 6:30 last night? At home. Alone? Yes. Convenient. Beatrice's eyes hardened. You already believe I killed Honoria. I believe you had opportunity to tamper with her lozenges when you visited at 4:10. So did half the household. You gave her the silver box. A present is not a murder weapon merely because poison later appears in it. No, but this might be. He placed a bottle on the table. It had been found in a locked cabinet in Beatrice's late husband's study. Aconite liniment, for external use only. Beatrice stared. My husband kept veterinary preparations. He bred horses. Bottles nearly empty. It has been for years. Your fingerprints are on it. It is in my house. Hargreaves leaned closer. You see the difficulty? Yes. And I think somebody wishes you to see it. Miss Marple looked at her with interest. It was the first thing Beatrice had said that morning that sounded entirely sincere. That afternoon, Miss Marple walked to Ashcombe House alone. She asked Elsie to show her the morning room again. The curtains were open, the shattered vase had been removed, the silver box was gone with the police evidence. But on the carpet behind the curtain, Miss Marple found a tiny black crescent. Not paper, not dirt, a fragment of hardened rubber. Near the socket, the carpet pile showed 2 pressure marks. Whatever had stood there had possessed little feet. A machine. Miss Marple went to the library. The reel-to-reel recorder had 4 rubber feet. One was chipped. She compared the break. It did not match. So there were 2 machines, she murmured. Elsie at the door looked puzzled. 2, miss. Perhaps. Mrs. Vale only had the 1. Then somebody brought another. Elsie frowned. I did see a case. When? Yesterday. Who had it? Elsie opened her mouth. Then fear entered her face. I don't know. You do. It was only for a moment. Tell me, Mrs. Harcourt. Beatrice had carried a dark leather case when she arrived at 4:10. She had said it contained church accounts. Miss Marple asked, did she leave with it? Elsie's expression changed again. No. Are you certain? Yes. She left carrying only her handbag. Where was the case later? I never thought about it. The police searched again. Nothing. Then Simpson the gardener remembered seeing Beatrice at the side door at 4:45. She had a case then. Miss Marple blinked. So she did leave with it. Yes, miss. That seemed to destroy Elsie's statement. Until Simpson added, funny thing though, looked lighter when she left. Hargreaves stared at him. How can a case look lighter? The way she carried it, coming in, both hands, going out, one. That evening, the laboratory telephoned. The poisoned lozenge contained not only aconitine, embedded in its softened surface were microscopic fibers of grey wool, the same kind of wool used in a woman's glove. Hargreaves looked at the three ladies. Beatrice wore grey gloves. Lydia wore grey gloves. Clara wore grey gloves. And Miss Marple, after a moment, began quietly to laugh. Inspector, she said, I think somebody has been trying much too hard to be fair. Chapter 5. The Dead Woman's Voice. Miss Marple's laughter offended Inspector Hargreaves only until she explained it. When evidence points equally at three people, she said, one should consider whether someone has arranged for it to do so. The grey wool was useless. All three women owned gloves from the same village draper. The aconite bottle was suspicious, but almost theatrically suspicious. The silver box connected Beatrice to Honoria, but everyone knew of the gift. The missing tape connected Clara to Honoria. Lydia, through her husband's profession, could obtain poisons more easily than either. Each woman had been supplied with one neat reason to be suspected. Like place cards, said Hargreaves. Exactly. So you think the murderer wants us choosing among the three? I think the murderer expects it. But one of them may still be guilty. Oh yes, Hargreaves frowned. You make that sound reassuring. It isn't. They returned to Elsie's account of the cry. The servant was adamant. She heard Honoria at 5:42. You looked at the pantry clock? Yes, sir. Was it accurate? Mr. Vale set it Monday. What exactly happened? I came from the kitchen. I was carrying clean napkins. When I passed the morning room door, I heard Mrs. Vale say, You liar, get out. Then something crashed. Did you hear another voice? No. Did you try the door? No. Why not? Elsie looked embarrassed. Mrs. Vale could be very sharp. If she wanted someone out, I didn't want to be the next person she shouted at, yet the door was locked. I didn't know that then, Miss Marple asked. How loud was the voice? Very. Natural? Elsie hesitated. I suppose. Did it sound close to the door? Another hesitation. No, more toward the window. Exactly where the curtain hid the socket. Hargreaves borrowed the parish school's portable tape machine. Clara Bell recognized it immediately. That is ours. Could somebody have borrowed it? There's a loan book. The book showed the recorder had been borrowed 2 weeks earlier by Beatrice Harcourt for a church appeal recording. Returned 4 days later. Did you check it personally? Clara frowned. No, it was on the shelf. Could Mrs. Harcourt have kept it and returned another? I suppose. But when the school recorder was examined, all 4 rubber feet were intact. It was not the machine that had stood behind Honoria's curtain. The trail seemed to stop. Miss Marple went instead to the village electrical shop. Mr. Clegg remembered selling a small automatic time switch 3 weeks earlier. What does it do? Hargreaves asked. Turns a lamp on or off at a set time. Could it start a tape recorder? If the machine's switch were already on, yes. Who bought it? Mr. Clegg scratched his chin. Lady. Paid cash. Which lady? Couldn't say. Old? Young? Middle-aged. In Bellwether that reduces the field to about 60 people, Hargreaves muttered. Miss Marple asked, Was she wearing gloves? Mr. Clegg brightened. Yes. Hargreaves sighed. Later, at Ashcombe House, Miss Marple studied Honoria's desk. The solicitor had supplied an inventory of missing documents. Honoria's draft statement, Julian's correspondence, the recording reel. But one thing remained, a page of shorthand notes in Honoria's own hand. Most were incomprehensible to Hargreaves. Clara recognized the system. She taught herself years ago. One line had been written in ordinary script. B says there is no forgiveness without silence. Miss Marple read it twice. Beatrice, probably, Hargreaves said. Perhaps. Who else begins with B? Bellwether is unusually rich in Bs. That afternoon, Adrian Vale came voluntarily to the police station. "I've been lying." Hargreaves did not look surprised. At last, someone says it plainly. Adrian lit a cigarette, then crushed it out before smoking. "I wasn't in the billiard room continuously." "When did you leave?" "About 5:35. "Where did you go?" "To the library." "Why lie?" "Because I was searching my aunt's desk." "Why?" Adrian's face flushed. "I owe money." "How much?" "Enough." "You expected to inherit?" "Yes." "And you wanted to know whether she had changed her will." "Did she?" "No. At least, not that I found." "Did you enter the morning room?" "It was locked." "Did you hear her voice?" "No." Hargreaves sat forward. "You were in the library at 5:42, next door to the morning room, and you heard nothing." Adrian blinked. "No. But Elsie heard Mrs. Vale shout from the passage." "I heard nothing." A new contradiction. The walls between library and morning room were thinner than the door to the passage. If Honoria's voice had truly been loud enough for Elsie to hear outside, Adrian should have heard it more clearly, unless Adrian was lying again, or Elsie was, or the sound had been directed toward the passage rather than the room. Miss Marple asked Adrian to stand in the library while Hargreaves played a recording behind the morning room curtain. Adrian heard it easily. They closed the connecting wall cupboard. Still audible. They lowered the volume. Still faintly audible. "You would have heard the shout," Hargreaves said. Adrian looked frightened. "Then it didn't happen," Elsie was recalled. Under pressure, she began to cry. "I did hear it." "Nobody says you didn't," Miss Marple told her. "But perhaps you heard it somewhere else. It came from the morning room. Did you see the door when you heard it?" Elsie stared. "No. What were you looking at?" "The linen in my arms." "Where exactly were you?" "Near the service door." Miss Marple walked the passage. Near the service door stood an old ventilation grill. Beyond it ran a narrow duct installed when the house had been modernized. The duct connected to the morning room near the curtain. Sound placed directly beside that vent would travel oddly. Hargreaves tested it. From behind the curtain, a recording sounded louder in the passage than in the library. The false cry was possible. They now knew roughly how, not who. At dusk, Clara Bell came to Ashcombe House and asked to speak privately with Miss Marple. "I left the meeting at 5:32. "Where did you go?" "The church." "The old schoolroom?" "No, the vestry." "Why?" Clara handed her a folded piece of paper. It was a copy of Julian's first letter. "I had hidden it years ago in an old prayer book." "Why retrieve it yesterday?" "Honoria telephoned me at lunch. She said she was finally going to tell everything, and you were afraid." "I was ashamed." "Of what the letter proved?" Clara's eyes shone with tears. "Of what it proved about me." Miss Marple unfolded it. Most of the letter was exactly as Clara had described, but near the end, Julian had written, "Beatrice knows where the larger money went. Ask her about Charles and the blue ledger. She promised she would speak if ever it became necessary." Miss Marple looked up. "Did you confront Beatrice?" "Not yesterday." "Why?" "Because the letter was gone." "Gone?" "The prayer book was there. The envelope was there. But someone had already taken the original. Clara had lied because she was searching for evidence. Lydia had lied because she was meeting Peter. That left Beatrice, the only woman whose movements had apparently never required concealment. Miss Marple folded the copy. "Clara, who knew where you hid the letter?" "Only one person." "Honoria?" Clara shook her head. "Beatrice." Before Miss Marple could answer, a car horn sounded outside. Inspector Hargreaves came in moments later, carrying a brown paper parcel. It had been delivered anonymously to the police station. Inside was the missing tape reel, and on the tape was Honoria Vale's voice. Clear, angry, unmistakable. "You liar, get out." But the next voice on the recording did not belong to Honoria. It belonged to Clara Bell. Chapter 6. The Alibi That Belonged to Nobody. Clara listened to her own voice and turned grey. On the tape, Honoria said, "You liar, get out." Then Clara answered, "You have lied for 25 years, Honoria. Don't dare call me one." A crash followed. The recording stopped. Inspector Hargreaves removed the reel from the machine. When was this recorded? Clara sat rigidly. 4 days ago. The interview? Yes. You told us Honoria never said those words. I had forgotten. That is difficult to believe. Clara covered her face. We quarreled after the interview. I thought the machine had been switched off. Apparently not. What broke? A glass. Honoria knocked it from the desk. Then someone had a ready-made recording of the exact scene Elsie later heard. Yes. Hargreaves looked almost pitying. And it includes your voice. But Elsie heard only Honoria. Because the tape could have been stopped before your reply. Clara stood. I did not kill her. You had access to this reel. You had access to the school equipment. You left the parish room. You searched for Julian's letter, and Mrs. Vale was planning to reveal something you wished hidden. I wished the truth known. Then why lie from the beginning? Because I was ashamed. Her voice cracked. The room fell silent. Miss Marple said softly, ashamed people often look guilty because they spend so much energy protecting the wrong thing. Hargreaves gave her a tired glance. You think Miss Bell is innocent? I think her guilt is too tidy. Clara looked at her. Thank you. I did not say you were innocent, dear. Clara almost smiled. The anonymous parcel provided little forensic help. Common brown paper, string from a village post office, no useful fingerprints. But the reel itself revealed something important. The recorded quarrel lasted more than 6 minutes. At one point, Honoria referred to Julian. You let him carry Lydia's shame, Clara accused. And you let him go, Honoria replied, because you told me he confessed. I told you what was necessary. For Charles? A long pause. Then Honoria said, You know nothing about Charles. The tape clicked off. Charles Vale, Hargreaves said. Honoria's late husband. Julian's letter had mentioned Charles and a blue ledger. The larger theft had likely been his. The problem was proving it. Peter's stolen papers might have done so. They were still missing. Miss Marple visited Beatrice that evening. Mrs. Harcourt received her in a drawing room so orderly that even the fire seemed disciplined. You think I killed Honoria, Beatrice said. I think Inspector Hargreaves suspects you strongly. And you? I think you are frightened of something older than the murder. Beatrice poured tea. I am nearly 68. One accumulates old fears. Did Charles Vale steal from the Agricultural Trust? A spoon struck china. Only once. Then Beatrice continued pouring. I don't know. Julian thought you did. I was young. You knew Charles well. We all did. Miss Marple watched her. Did he court you? Beatrice's hand stopped. There it was. Not guilt, pain. Before Honoria, Beatrice said. He wanted to marry you? Yes. And you refused? My father had lost money. Charles was ambitious. He decided Honoria was the safer prospect. That must have hurt. It was 25 years ago. Old humiliations preserve very well. Beatrice gave a thin smile. You are more ruthless than you look. So I have been told. Charles stole the money. Miss Marple waited. I discovered it the week Julian disappeared, Beatrice continued. Charles came to me. He was desperate. He said an investment had failed, and he meant to replace everything. Did Honoria know? Eventually. And Julian? He had found out. Then why was Julian blamed? Beatrice looked toward the fire. Because Charles arranged the accounts that way. Julian had already replaced Lydia's £300. That entry made him vulnerable. And you knew? Yes. Why did you not speak? Beatrice's face hardened against memory. Charles threatened to expose Lydia. He threatened to say Julian had helped her conceal her child. He said Clara would be dragged through court. He said all our lives would be ruined. So you lied. We all lied. No, said Miss Marple. You did something more specific. Beatrice's eyes met hers. What? You told the police that Julian had confessed to you. A long silence. Yes. Had he? No. Why? Honoria asked me. Was there a written statement? Yes. Did you sign it? Yes. Miss Marple understood. Honoria's intended confession would not merely clear Julian, it would expose Beatrice as having given false evidence. Beatrice said quietly, That is what you came to hear. It is part of it. Then you believe I killed her to protect my reputation. Did you? No. Did you steal Clara's letter? No. Attack Peter? No. Bring a tape machine to Ashcombe House. Beatrice's eyes sharpened. I brought a case of church accounts. Elsie thought it heavy. Elsie has a vivid imagination. Simpson thought it lighter when you left. Then perhaps accounts lose weight when discussed. Miss Marple smiled. Paper does sometimes become less burdensome once it is no longer secret. Beatrice set down her cup. You have something else in mind. One very small thing. What? The lozenges. Beatrice did not move. Honoria had a habit, did she not? What habit? When choosing one. I wouldn't know. You visited often. So did Clara. Honoria arranged things. Beatrice's expression changed almost imperceptibly. Everyone arranges things. Some from left to right, some from right to left. Some take the largest, some the darkest. I never watched Honoria eat sweets. They were throat lozenges. Then I never watched her eat throat lozenges. Miss Marple rose. Thank you. At the door, Beatrice spoke. Miss Marple. Yes? You are wrong about one thing. What is that? We did not destroy Julian because we were protecting Charles. Miss Marple turned. Beatrice's face was pale. We destroyed him because Honoria told us he had chosen it. Chosen what? To take the blame. Why would he? Beatrice whispered. For Lydia. Then she closed the door. The statement sounded noble. It was also false. Miss Marple knew because Peter had repeated Julian's final words from Montreal. I should have told Clara. I thought Beatrice would. Julian had expected Beatrice to expose Charles. He had never chosen disgrace. Someone had invented that story afterward. The question was whether that someone had merely lied 25 years ago or murdered to preserve the lie now. Chapter 7. A Promise Made in Winter. The second attack came before dawn. Arthur Pritchard, Honoria's solicitor, woke to smoke in his bedroom. A fire had started in his study. It was quickly extinguished, but one cabinet had been forced open. Nothing valuable was missing. Only Honoria Vale's sealed legal packet. Fortunately, Pritchard had moved it the previous evening. Inside was a carbon copy of the sworn statement she intended to sign. Inspector Hargreaves read it at 8 that morning. Honoria's words were brutally plain. My brother Julian did not steal the principal sum missing from the Bellwether Agricultural Trust. My husband, Charles Vale, confessed the theft to me in December 1929. I concealed this fact. Beatrice Harcourt, then Beatrice Lane, knew Charles was responsible and nevertheless supplied a false statement suggesting Julian had confessed financial wrongdoing to her. Clara Bell and Lydia Shaw repeated statements they believed to be true because I misled them. The greatest blame was mine. Hargreaves lowered the page. Beatrice had 12,000 reasons to stop this. More than 12,000, Miss Marple said. Reputation is often valued more highly than money. There was another paragraph. Charles had kept a private accounting record, the Blue Ledger. Honoria believed Julian took it when he fled. Peter had brought it back from Canada. It was among the papers stolen from him. Whoever attacked Peter now has direct proof, Hargreaves said, unless the attacker destroyed it. Likely, perhaps. You think it still exists? I think people who have preserved secrets for 25 years sometimes find it difficult to burn them. Proof can be dangerous, but it can also be power. That afternoon, Hargreaves arrested Beatrice Harcourt. The evidence was circumstantial, but formidable. The aconite bottle in her home, the silver box she had given Honoria, the false statement exposed by Honoria's confession, her unexplained leather case, her knowledge of the original tape, and a shopkeeper in Much Benham who remembered selling her a replacement rubber foot for a portable recorder 6 months earlier. Beatrice heard the list calmly. Inspector, you are building a staircase from pieces that do not belong to the same house. You can explain them at the station. Clara watched Beatrice driven away. Lydia began to cry. Miss Marple did neither. She walked instead to the church. Mrs. Croft was dusting pews. Did Mrs. Harcourt leave the parish room at any point during the meeting? No. You are sure? I think so. Thinking and knowing are different. Mrs. Croft looked offended. I was there. Yes, that is why I ask. Miss Marple sat in a pew. Tell me exactly what you remember. Mrs. Croft sighed. Mrs. Harcourt sat at the head of the table, Miss Bell by the window, Mrs. Fenwick near the fire. At 5:18, Lydia left. Yes. You moved to the table. My back hurt. Where did you sit? Mrs. Fenwick's chair. Then Lydia returned. Yes. And Clara left. I suppose. Why suppose? I was making tea. So when Clara left, were you looking at the table? No. When you returned, 3 ladies were there. Which 3? Mrs. Croft frowned. Mrs. Harcourt, Mrs. Fenwick, and... She stopped. And... I assumed Miss Bell, but... Mrs. Croft's mouth opened. I don't know. Miss Marple leaned closer. Who was wearing Miss Bell's brown cardigan? Mrs. Croft stared, then laughed nervously. I was. Clara had lent it to her because the room was cold. From the lane, Mrs. Croft in Clara's cardigan could easily have been mistaken for Clara. But inside the room, who was missing? Miss Marple asked. Did Mrs. Harcourt ever ask you to fetch something? The biscuit tin. Where from? The kitchen. When? After Mrs. Fenwick came back. For how long were you out? 4 or 5 minutes. And when you returned? 3 ladies. Again, who? Mrs. Croft looked distressed. I don't know. I never thought I needed to count faces. There it was. The alibi did not merely have gaps. It had no reliable continuous witness at all. People remembered 3 ladies because they expected 3 ladies. Mrs. Croft moved in and out. Lydia left. Clara left. Perhaps Beatrice left too. The supposed alibi belonged to nobody. Hargreaves reluctantly released Beatrice that evening, pending further evidence. She could have slipped away for 5 minutes, he said, but Ashcombe House is too far. She couldn't go there and back. She did not need to. The recorder could have been set earlier. Then the meeting was only meant to establish where she was at the artificial time of death. Yes, which still points to Beatrice. It does. You are not satisfied. No. Why? Miss Marple knitted 3 stitches. Because Beatrice is being presented as a woman who planned everything very carefully and then kept the poison bottle in her own cabinet, gave the murder weapon as a personal gift, carried a suspicious case openly past the maid, used a recording linked to a quarrel everyone knew she could access, and attacked 2 people clumsily afterward. People make mistakes. Certainly. That could be all it is. It could, but you don't think so. Miss Marple shook her head. I think someone has confused 2 crimes. Hargreaves stared. Honoria's murder and Peter's attack. Yes. You think different people. I am almost sure. Then who attacked Peter? Someone searching for Julian's evidence. Beatrice. Perhaps. And who killed Honoria? Miss Marple looked toward the church clock. It struck 5, a quarter hour late. The mechanism had still not been properly corrected. Something in the sound made her stop. Inspector, what time did Beatrice leave Ashcombe House on the afternoon of the murder? 4:45. According to Beatrice. Elsie, Simpson, approximately. What time did the committee begin? 5. According to the church clock. Hargreaves went still. The church clock had been under repair. On the day of the murder, its chimes had been tested repeatedly. Everyone had anchored their memories to sounds that did not represent the true time. Then the whole timeline could be wrong. Only by minutes, said Miss Marple. But murders are often built in minutes. She went at once to the post office. The postmistress kept a precise electric clock because mailbags depended on railway schedules. She remembered Beatrice passing at 4:47. Clara entered the parish room at 4:52. Lydia at 4:58. The meeting began almost immediately. The church bell rang 5 while they were already seated. 5 minutes late. Mrs. Croft remembered Lydia leaving after the first quarter chime, but the bellkeeper had tested that quarter at 5:12, not 5:15. Lydia signed the ledger at 5:18, fixing 1 point. Clara's remembered 5:32 departure was probably 5:29, and Mrs. Croft's trip to the kitchen occurred around 5:34. For 4 minutes, Beatrice's position was unverified. Still not enough time to reach Ashcombe House, but enough time for something else. Miss Marple hurried into the parish room. Near the cupboard where church equipment was stored, she found a telephone. "Can this call Ashcombe House?" Mrs. Croft nodded. "Of course." Miss Marple looked at the receiver. then at the wall, then at an old box of electrical leads used for church recordings. No, too easy. The false cry had not been played from the parish room, but perhaps something else had. She opened the equipment cupboard. On the bottom shelf lay several spare reels of recording tape. One box was empty. On its label, in Clara Bell's handwriting, were the words, "Ashcombe Interview, Copy." The original reel had never been the important one. There had been a duplicate, and Clara had not known it existed. Miss Marple closed the cupboard. Behind her, somebody whispered, "Oh dear God." It was Lydia. She stood in the doorway, staring at the empty tape box. "I remember now," she said. "What? Who made the copy?" Miss Marple waited. Lydia's voice was almost inaudible. "It wasn't Beatrice." Chapter 8. The fourth person in the alibi. The person who made the duplicate tape was Adrian Vale. Clara had asked him to help copy recordings for the school exhibition because he owned better audio equipment in London. Adrian admitted it immediately. "I copied 6 reels. Honoria's was 1. "Did you keep a copy?" Hargreaves asked. "No." "Could you have?" "Yes." "Did you?" "No." "Did you know the quarrel was recorded?" Adrian hesitated. "I heard part of it, including your aunt saying, 'You liar, get out.'" "Yes." Hargreaves stared at him. "You neglected to mention this." "I forgot. You people in Bellwether have remarkable memories. They fail precisely where useful." Adrian's financial difficulties now looked more serious. Honoria's will left him Ashcombe House and most of her money. He knew the incriminating recording existed. He could obtain recording equipment. He had lied about his movements, and he had entered the library next to the murder room around the time of the false cry. But Miss Marple asked one question. Why would Adrian arrange a recording behind the curtain and then place himself in the next room where he ought to hear it? Hargreaves rubbed his forehead. To establish he heard Honoria alive, but he claimed he heard nothing. So if he is the murderer, he is exceptionally foolish. "Adrian is many things," Miss Marple said. "I am not yet convinced foolish is one." They reconstructed the sound. A machine behind the curtain, connected to a time switch, could play Honoria's cry at 5:42. The crash on the recording explained Elsie's vase. Except it did not. That was the problem Miss Marple had been worrying at for 2 days. The recording already contained a crash, yet the vase in the room had actually been broken. Why? If Elsie heard the crash on tape, there was no need for a physical vase to fall at that moment. And if Honoria had knocked it over while dying around 5:25, Adrian entering the library later should have noticed nothing unusual. The shattered vase had been positioned beside the hearth. Miss Marple examined photographs taken before the body was moved. One piece of porcelain lay much farther away than the others, beneath a chair. She picked up the evidence bag containing it. There was a faint smear on the glazed surface. Wax. "Green candle wax, were candles burning?" Hargreaves asked. "No, but a green candle stood on the mantel. Its lower edge was freshly chipped." Miss Marple reconstructed what had happened. The vase had not fallen naturally from the side table. Someone had broken it earlier and arranged the pieces. A fragment had been used to wedge or manipulate something near the mantel, collecting wax. "Why stage a real broken vase when the recording supplies the sound?" Hargreaves asked. "To make Elsie's memory feel confirmed," Miss Marple said. When she heard the cry and later saw the broken vase, she joined sound to sight. The murderer gave her a visible reason to trust what she heard. Who had time to break and arrange it? Someone who visited before the room was locked. Beatrice. Again. Except Elsie remembered the vase intact when she delivered tea at 5:15. "You saw it?" Hargreaves asked. "Yes. The tray table is beside it. I'm certain." That destroyed the theory. Unless Elsie's certainty was another assumption. Miss Marple asked her to demonstrate. Elsie carried a tray to the door, as she had that afternoon. The room was locked. "You put the tray outside." "Yes." "Could you see the vase?" Elsie flushed. "No." "Then you did not see it at 5:15. "No." So the last confirmed sighting of the intact vase was, Elsie thought, around 4:30, when I brought Mrs. Harcourt coffee. Beatrice had opportunity. But so had Honoria herself. And Adrian, who entered the room earlier that afternoon. The investigation seemed to be tightening and widening at the same time. Miss Marple returned to the parish room. The fourth person in the alibi, Mrs. Croft, now interested her for a different reason. Not because Mrs. Croft was guilty, because nobody noticed her. People saw what social habit told them to see. 3 committee ladies, 1 caretaker. The caretaker could occupy a committee chair without becoming, in memory, one of the counted women. That evening, Miss Marple asked all 4 women to sit around the parish table exactly as they had. Beatrice at the head, Clara by the window, Lydia near the fire, Mrs. Croft moving between kitchen and table. "Now," Miss Marple said, "Lydia, leave as you did." Lydia did. "Mrs. Croft, sit in her chair." She obeyed. From the lane, 3 female silhouettes remained. Lydia, return. Clara, leave. Again, 3. Mrs. Croft, go to the kitchen. Now only 2 remained, Beatrice and Lydia. But a person passing the lane at that moment had reported seeing 3. Hargreaves checked his notes. The butcher's boy. Exactly. Then there must have been someone else. Miss Marple nodded. A 4th woman had not merely been overlooked. There had been a 5th person in the parish room, someone present only briefly, someone never included in the official meeting. Mrs. Croft gasped. "Oh, you remember? The collecting woman." "What collecting woman?" "She came for jumble. The church jumble sale was the following week." Villagers had been leaving bags of clothing. A woman in a dark coat and scarf had entered through the kitchen door carrying a suitcase. Mrs. Croft assumed she was leaving donations. "How long was she there?" 5 minutes. "Did you see her face?" "No. Scarf high up, hat down." "Where did she go?" "Equipment cupboard, I think. I told her donations went in the old schoolroom, but she said Mrs. Harcourt had told her otherwise." Beatrice stared. "I did no such thing. The woman had entered around 5:33, during Mrs. Croft's kitchen absence. She had sat briefly near the table while waiting. The butcher's boy saw 3 silhouettes, Beatrice, Lydia, and the stranger. Then the stranger left through the rear door, carrying the same suitcase. Hargreaves said slowly, "The murderer came to the parish room. To create an alibi," Lydia whispered. "No," said Miss Marple. "To retrieve something." "The recorder?" "Yes. A device placed in Honoria's room earlier could not be collected from the parish room, unless it was never at Ashcombe House after all." Miss Marple suddenly saw the mistake. The pale mark behind Honoria's curtain did not prove a recorder had stood there on the day of the murder. It proved something had stood there recently. The sound duct carried noise. What if the recording machine had been placed elsewhere along that duct? Hargreaves and Adrian examined the service passage. Above a linen cupboard was a ventilation access panel. Inside lay dust disturbed by recent handling. A socket had been installed years before for an electric fan. From there, a tape recorder could direct sound through the duct into the morning room and passage. The machine could then be removed without unlocking Honoria's door. The disguised jumble collector had come from Ashcombe House after retrieving it. But who? Mrs. Croft remembered one detail. The shoes. What about them? Very good shoes, brown leather, low heel, but mud on the left one. A smear of distinctive pale chalky mud. Only one nearby path had been resurfaced with chalk gravel that week, the footpath behind Ashcombe House. Hargreaves checked every suspect's shoes. Beatrice's were clean, Clara's were black, Lydia wore soft grey walking shoes, Adrian's were men's brogues. Then Miss Marple asked an odd question. "Where is Elsie Carter?" No one answered. Elsie had gone home early. Her room at Ashcombe House was empty. Her uniform hung behind the door. Beneath the bed was a pair of expensive brown shoes, and in the wardrobe lay a dark coat, a scarf, and a woman's hat. Hargreaves stared. Elsie was the jumble collector. Miss Marple nodded. But why? In the pocket of the coat they found the missing blue ledger, and a photograph. It showed Honoria Vale, Charles Vale, Beatrice Harcourt, and a much younger woman whose face strongly resembled Elsie Carter. On the back was written, Margaret Carter, 1930. Hargreaves looked at Miss Marple. Who was Margaret? Miss Marple's expression became very grave. I think she was the one person everyone forgot when they told the story of Julian Vale. Chapter 9. Precisely the wrong evening, Elsie Carter was arrested at the railway station before the London train arrived. She did not resist. When Inspector Hargreaves asked about the disguise, the blue ledger, Peter Shaw's attack, and the fire at Pritchard's office, she denied murder. I never killed Mrs. Vale. You planted the recording? Yes. You stole the ledger? Yes. You attacked Peter. Elsie began to cry. I only meant to frighten him. He turned and grabbed me. I hit him. You set fire to Mr. Pritchard's study? Yes. Yet you did not murder Honoria? No. Hargreaves looked toward Miss Marple. Then perhaps you would like to explain. They gathered that evening in the drawing room at Ashcombe House. Beatrice sat rigidly beside the fireplace. Clara and Lydia shared the sofa. Adrian stood near the window. Peter Shaw, pale but recovered enough to attend, sat beside Dr. Fenwick. Elsie was brought in under supervision. Miss Marple placed her knitting in her lap. The difficulty, she began, is that there have been too many lies, and we have assumed they all served the same purpose. She looked at Lydia. Mrs. Fenwick lied about remaining at the parish meeting because she was meeting Peter, her son, whose existence she had concealed for many years. Lydia lowered her eyes. Miss Bell lied because she went to retrieve Julian's letter from the vestry. Clara nodded. Mrs. Croft unintentionally helped create the illusion that 3 committee ladies were continuously present because she moved in and out of their chairs. Witnesses counted figures rather than identities. Mrs. Croft murmured, I'm very sorry. You have nothing to apologize for. Miss Marple turned to Elsie. And Elsie created a second illusion. Elsie stared at the carpet. She knew Honoria was dead before 5:42. Hargreaves frowned. How? Because she entered the morning room. Adrian interrupted. The door was locked. Yes. Key inside. Yes. Windows bolted. Yes. Miss Marple smiled faintly. But nobody asked the most ordinary question. Who carried the tea tray away from the passage? Silence. Elsie had said she left it outside at 5:15. When she returned 5 minutes later, it was gone. Everyone assumed Honoria had opened the door and taken it inside, but Elsie herself had taken it in. How? Hargreaves asked. Honoria had unlocked the door when she heard the tray. Elsie entered briefly. Honoria was already ill, but alive. Elsie shook her head. No. You saw her suffering. No. You knew she had been poisoned. No. You did not poison her, Miss Marple said gently. That is why you are frightened of admitting the truth. Elsie stopped. Miss Marple continued. Your mother was Margaret Carter. Elsie's face collapsed. Margaret had been a typist at the Agricultural Trust. She had loved Julian Vale. Not romantically, as a friend. She was the person who discovered Charles Vale manipulating accounts. She gave Julian copies. When Julian fled, Margaret lost her position. Honoria saw to it that she was dismissed as unreliable. She left Bellwether pregnant and poor. Elsie was her daughter. My mother died believing Julian was a thief, Elsie whispered. She thought he had used her. But recently, you learned otherwise. A letter came from Peter. Peter nodded. I contacted her because Julian had kept Margaret's name. Elsie began working at Ashcombe House 6 months earlier under her own surname, which Honoria did not connect with the former typist. When Peter arrived with the blue ledger, Elsie stole it. She wanted proof before Honoria could control the story again. You planned the recording trick before the murder, Miss Marple said. Yes. A murmur went around the room. Elsie had not planned to kill Honoria. She planned to frighten her. She copied the old argument from the school reel, with Adrian's unused duplicate. She obtained a cheap second-hand recorder and a time switch. Her intention was to play Honoria's own voice unexpectedly through the ventilation duct, while Honoria sat alone, making her believe Clara had somehow returned to confront her. A childish revenge, Elsie whispered. I wanted her frightened by the words she used on others. She placed the equipment in the service duct before 5 and intended to remove it while the household was distracted. But when she brought tea, she found Honoria already collapsing. She opened the door, Elsie said. She couldn't breathe properly. She said her hands were burning. She told me to fetch Dr. Fenwick. Why didn't you? Elsie sobbed. Because she saw the ledger under my apron. Honoria recognized it. She understood who Elsie was. They argued. Honoria tried to seize the ledger. The vase fell and broke. Honoria then stumbled toward the door, locked it after Elsie fled through the connecting service hatch. Adrian stared. What hatch? The morning room contained an old coal cupboard built into the wall. It no longer opened into the library, but behind its panel was a narrow servant access to the passage, painted over on one side and still usable from within the cupboard. Elsie had discovered it while cleaning. She fled through it. Honoria, fearing Elsie would return, locked the main door and took the key. Moments later, the poison killed her. Elsie removed the recorder after 5:42, disguised herself, carried it to the parish room because Beatrice's committee meeting gave her a place to hide among departing people, then retrieved it in the jumble suitcase. You made yourself hear the voice, Hargreaves said. Yes. You became your own witness. Yes. That was why the sound was heard so clearly by Elsie, and not Adrian. She already knew exactly when to stand near the ventilation grill. She lied that she had heard it accidentally. But if Elsie didn't poison Honoria, Hargreaves said, who did? Miss Marple looked at the three ladies. This is where the missing alibi becomes important, only because it distracted us from the person who did not need one. Beatrice went very pale. Miss Marple turned toward her. You poisoned the lozenge, Mrs. Harcourt, Lydia whispered. Beatrice? Beatrice said nothing. The poison bottle in your house was not planted. Your fingerprints were on it because you used it. The silver box was your gift because you wanted Honoria to develop the habit of keeping her lozenges there. Hargreaves said, but how could she know Honoria would choose the poisoned one? Because Honoria was particular. She always arranged lozenges in a clockwise circle and took the one nearest the hinge first. Elsie stared. That's true. Miss Marple nodded. When you refilled the box, you placed new lozenges from right to left, didn't you? Yes. Mrs. Harcourt knew because she had watched Honoria do it repeatedly. Beatrice spoke at last. That proves nothing. No. The gloves help a little, but not enough. The decisive clue was your leather case. The accounts? You brought them in a case large enough to contain church papers. But Simpson noticed it was lighter when you left. You did not bring a recorder. You brought the blue ledger. Peter leaned forward. But I had the ledger then. You had a blue ledger. Silence. Miss Marple looked at him. Julian made a copy. Peter's eyes widened. Yes, there were two. He nodded slowly. One original, one copy in a newer cover. Honoria already possessed the original. She had hidden it for 25 years. Beatrice closed her eyes. That was what Honoria intended to give Pritchard. Beatrice had visited at 4:10 not merely to discuss church funds, but because Honoria had telephoned her and said the truth would be signed that evening. She showed you the ledger, Miss Marple said. She told you she would confess. Beatrice's voice was low. She said I should be grateful. Clara stared at her. Grateful? For being forgiven, Miss Marple continued. During the argument, you removed the original ledger and put it into your case, but you knew Honoria had already drafted a statement. You could not stop the truth merely by taking the book. So I killed her, Beatrice said. You had brought the aconite already. Lydia covered her mouth. Beatrice gave a broken laugh. You make it sound very deliberate. It was. No. You treated one lozenge before you arrived. You placed it nearest the hinge, while Honoria was angry and distracted. Beatrice's composure finally shattered. She was going to destroy everything. No, Clara said. She was going to tell the truth. Beatrice turned on her. After 25 years, when it cost her nothing. Charles was dead. Julian was dying. She would have stood up like some great moral penitent and left the rest of us to carry the shame. You gave false evidence, Hargreaves said. I was 22, and Honoria's confession would expose that. My daughter's husband is standing for Parliament. My grandchildren bear my name. Do you know what newspapers do with old scandals? Miss Marple's voice remained quiet. People often say they commit terrible acts for their children, when what they mean is that they cannot bear their children to know what they themselves have done. Beatrice looked at her. Something went out of her face. Yes, she whispered. That was the truth. Not politics, not newspapers, not even prison. Beatrice had built her life upon being the dependable one, the righteous one, the woman who chaired committees, settled quarrels, advised younger wives, and spoke of duty. Honoria's confession would reveal that when duty had once demanded courage, Beatrice had chosen herself. "I thought Julian had agreed," she said. Clara shook her head. "No, you wanted to think that." Beatrice's eyes filled. "Charles told me Julian would go away." "And when Julian wrote asking you to speak?" Miss Marple asked. "I burned the letter." Clara closed her eyes. There was the oldest crime. Not murder, silence. Beatrice had let Clara believe Julian guilty because admitting the truth would have exposed her own false statement. Years accumulated. Marriage, children, deaths, respectability. Then Julian's return from beyond the grave, through Peter and the blue ledger, threatened everything. "You took the original ledger from Honoria," Hargreaves said. "Where is it?" Beatrice looked at Elsie. "I hid it in the church equipment cupboard." Elsie gave a startled cry. "The tape box?" "Yes." When Elsie later entered the cupboard disguised as the jumble collector, she saw a blue book and assumed it was Peter's stolen ledger. In reality, Elsie had unknowingly stolen the original from Beatrice. Peter's copy had been hidden somewhere else after she attacked him. "Where?" Hargreaves asked. Elsie looked ashamed. "Under the altar linen in the old schoolroom." Within the hour, both ledgers were recovered. The account entries matched. Charles Vale had stolen the principal sum. Julian had been innocent. At last, Clara sat alone near the dying fire after the others left. 25 years, she said. Miss Marple sat beside her. "I wasted 25 years hating him. Not all of them. I could have married him. Perhaps. Could have gone to Canada. Perhaps." Clara looked at her. "You don't believe in comforting lies. They are usually expensive in the end." Clara smiled through tears. Peter came quietly into the room and held out an envelope. "Julian wanted you to have this." Clara stared at it for a long time before opening it. The letter was short. She read it once, then again. Finally, she pressed it to her lips. "What did he say?" Lydia asked softly. Clara folded the paper. "That he hoped I had been happy." Nobody spoke. Outside, the church clock began striking. It was still 5 minutes wrong. Miss Marple listened to it and smiled. All week they had been measuring the truth by unreliable clocks, borrowed memories, counted silhouettes, old promises, and the convenient certainty that 3 ladies seen at a table must be the same 3 ladies who had sat down there. But the missing alibi had never truly belonged to Lydia, or Clara, or even Beatrice. It belonged to a whole village that had spent 25 years believing the version of the past that caused the least inconvenience. And once that alibi disappeared, Julian Vale had nowhere left to hide, not even in disgrace. Dear friends, that brings us to the end of 3 ladies, 1 missing alibi. Sometimes the most dangerous secret is not the one a person keeps for a day, but the one an entire community quietly agrees not to question for years. If you enjoyed following the clues through Bellwether, I'd love to know when you first became suspicious, and whether the missing alibi led you toward the truth or away from it. Thank you for spending this mystery with us. If these quiet villages, hidden motives, and carefully buried secrets are your kind of evening, you're always welcome to join us again for the next case. Until then, take care, stay curious, and never trust a perfectly respectable alibi too quickly.